Are you lost, Grandpa? The voice was sharp. It was full of smugness and disrespect. It belonged to a young man named Kyle. He worked as a flight line technician. His name tag was clearly visible on his uniform. He had his arms crossed. He looked impatient and annoyed. Kyle was standing over an old man. The old man didn't respond right away. He remained perfectly still. His gaze was fixed on something very important. He wasn't looking at Kyle. He was looking at a silent, huge F-16 Fighting Falcon jet sitting on the tarmac in front of them. The jet was dead. It wasn't working. Its canopy was open like a broken mouth. Wires and cables hung from an open maintenance panel. Many people had tried to fix this jet, but nobody could figure out what was wrong. The old man's name was Arthur Vance. He was more than 80 years old. His back was slightly bent from all those years. His hands were wrinkled and scarred from decades of hard work. He wore simple khaki pants and a worn windbreaker. He looked like a tourist who had wandered into a place where tourists shouldn't be. Another slightly older technician walked over. He was wiping sweat from his face with a greasy glove. "Great, just what we need," Kyle said mockingly, pointing his chin at Arthur. "I think he thinks this is a museum." Kyle's voice suddenly changed. He spoke slowly and loudly, like he was talking to a small child. "Sir, you can't be here. This is a restricted area. I need you to go back to the gate right now." Arthur's eyes were pale blue and cloudy from age. Finally, they moved, but he didn't look at Kyle. Instead, his eyes traced the side of the fighter jet. He seemed to be following lines that only he could see. He took one slow, deliberate step closer to the aircraft's landing gear. Kyle's frustration boiled over. He had been working on this broken jet for 3 hours with no luck. Now this old man was making things worse. "I said step away from the aircraft right now." Kyle moved quickly to stop Arthur. He put his hand on Arthur's shoulder to push him away. "This is a $16 million piece of military equipment, not a park bench." Finally, Arthur's gaze met Kyle's. There was no fear in his eyes. There was no anger. There wasn't even annoyance. There was only a quiet, deep focus. Kyle seemed like a minor distraction, like a buzzing insect in a room that held something much more interesting. The pressure on the flight line was enormous. The grounded F-16, call sign Viper 7, was the lead plane for a very important exercise. This exercise was scheduled to start in less than 1 hour. Foreign dignitaries, important visitors from other countries, were already waiting to watch. The base's wing commander was getting more and more upset over the radio. Every technician on the flight line felt the stress. Kyle felt it most of all because he was the lead. Kyle and his team had been working on this problem for 3 hours. They had replaced the entire avionics control unit. They had tested the power relays. They had run computer tests until their eyes were tired. Nothing worked. The F-16 was completely broken. This old man's appearance felt like an insult. It felt like the whole world was refusing to cooperate with Kyle's plans. "I need to see some identification, sir," Kyle demanded. His voice echoed across the tarmac. "Your flight line pass, now." Arthur didn't reach for a wallet. Instead, his hand slowly went to the pocket of his windbreaker. It came out holding a small, worn leather pouch. The leather was dark with age and oil from his hands. It looked like the kind of pouch someone might use for carrying tobacco or small tools. Kyle let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "What is that, your toolkit? What are you going to do? Fix a fly-by-wire system with a pocket knife and some string?" A few of the other young technicians laughed nervously. They were mostly in their early 20s. They followed Kyle's lead. The scene was becoming a show on the huge, hot tarmac. A circle of people was forming around the broken jet. The young uniformed crew and the silent elderly man. "Sir, I am not going to ask you again," Kyle said. His face was red. "Get away from this aircraft, or I will have security forces escort you off this base." Arthur ignored the threat. His attention was somewhere else. With slow, deliberate movements, he unrolled the leather pouch. Inside, resting in soft felt cloth, were not crude tools. They were a small, carefully organized set of instruments. They were clearly old. Some of them looked handmade. Their steel was darkened by age and use. One was a strange-looking spanner wrench with a uniquely angled head. Kyle stared at the tools. His mockery grew deeper. "Are you kidding me? Where did you get that junk? A World War II surplus store. You probably flew those old planes, didn't you, Pops?" Things were a lot simpler back then. As Kyle's mocking words hung in the hot air, Arthur's fingers brushed against the handle of the peculiar spanner wrench. The feeling of the worn metal was like a key. It unlocked a memory in his mind. The world dissolved. The bright sun-bleached tarmac disappeared. He was suddenly in a dim, humid hangar from decades ago. The air was thick with the smell of burnt fuel, sweat, and fear. A battle-damaged F-4 Phantom jet stood there. Its wing was filled with shrapnel holes. Hydraulic fluid dripped from it onto the concrete floor. A younger Arthur, his face tight with focus and smudged with grease, was wedged deep inside the jet's maintenance area. He was working by the faint glow of a handheld lamp. The very same spanner wrench was in his hand. Outside, the distant sound of artillery provided a scary soundtrack. A crew chief was shouting frantically, "We need that bird in the air. Art, they're getting hammered out there." Arthur didn't answer. He just gave one final precise turn with the wrench. A valve seated. The hydraulic leak stopped. He slid out from under the wing and nodded. "She'll fly." The memory was gone in a flash, a whisper from the past that informed the present moment. Back on the tarmac, things were getting worse. One of the other technicians, eager to impress Kyle, chimed in. "Maybe he thinks it's a car. Maybe it needs a jump start." The circle of onlookers grew bigger. On the far side of the flight line, working on another aircraft, was Master Sergeant Reyes. He was a career crew chief with 30 years of service. The lines around his eyes showed all that experience. He had seen young team leads like Kyle come and go. He had been watching the confrontation with growing unease. At first, when he was just annoyed that a civilian had gotten onto the flight line. But then he started really watching the old man. It wasn't his clothes or his age. It was his posture. It was the way he stood. He wasn't looking at the F-16 like a tourist. He was studying it. He was assessing it carefully. His gaze moved methodically from the wing roots to the engine intake to the specific panel Kyle's team had been fighting with. It was the stance of someone who knew machines, someone who was sizing up a problem. There was an economy of motion, an absolute stillness that Reyes hadn't seen in years. It reminded him of the old legends, the stories about the original engineers from the design company, men who could listen to an engine and tell you which specific part was broken. Kyle's patience finally snapped. He reached out and grabbed Arthur's arm more forcefully this time. "That's it, old-timer. Your little field trip is over. We're going to see security." He started to pull the unresisting old man away from the jet. That was the moment for Master Sergeant Reyes. Something clicked. A name from one of those old stories surfaced in his memory. A ghost story almost. He pulled out his cell phone. His heart suddenly pounded very fast. He didn't call the security desk. He scrolled through his contacts to find a number he rarely used. The direct line to the maintenance group commander's office. A young captain answered. "Colonel Davidson's office." "Sir, this is Master Sergeant Reyes on the flight line," he said. His voice was low and urgent. "You're not going to believe this. We've got Viper 7 grounded, the one for the distinguished visitors flight. The tech team is stuck. They can't solve the problem, and their lead is about to have a civilian arrested." "A civilian? How did a civilian get on the active flight line?" "That's the thing, sir," Reyes continued, watching Kyle try to pull the old man. "The way he's looking at the Viper, it reminds me of the stories about the ghost of the flight line, the man who wrote the book on this bird." There was a pause. "Sir, I think his name might be Vance. Arthur Vance." The silence on the other end was immediate and absolute. The phone call landed like a bomb in the wing commander's office. Colonel Matthews was in the middle of a tense meeting. The grounded F-16 was the only topic being discussed. His executive officer burst in without knocking, something that would normally get him in serious trouble. "Sir, you need to take this call. It's about the civilian on the flight line." Colonel Matthews grabbed the phone. His face was like a thundercloud. "What is it?" He listened. His expression shifted from anger to confusion, then to stunned shock. His knuckles went white as he gripped the phone. "Say that name again." He listened once more. "Vance? Are you sure? Arthur Vance?" The colonel's face went pale. He shot to his feet, knocking his chair back. The operations chief stared in confusion. "Get me his file," Matthews barked at his aide. "The archive file, the one marked Living Legend." Now! His aide, sensing something very important was happening, scrambled from his desk and sprinted toward the records vault. Colonel Matthews turned his attention back to the phone. His voice was now a low, urgent command. Listen to me very carefully. Get on the radio to the flight line. I want you to tell that technician to stand down. By my authority, do not let anyone touch Mr. Vance. Do not let anyone speak to him. Everyone is to freeze. Is that clear? That is a direct order from the wing commander. I am on my way. He slammed the phone down and grabbed his flight cap. Get the command car now. Tell them to clear the way to the main tarmac. But on the hot concrete, the stand-down order had not yet arrived. Time on a flight line can move in strange ways. An hour can feel like a minute, and 10 seconds can stretch into an eternity. For Kyle, this was his moment. He was still holding Arthur's thin arm. This was proof of his control. He leaned in. His voice dripped with condescending pity. Look, I get it. Things get confusing when you get older. But you are a danger to yourself and to this equipment. For your own safety, I'm taking you to the security office. They'll get you checked out. Maybe they'll call your family. He was declaring the old man mentally confused, a final public humiliation. He gave Arthur's arm a firm tug. He intended to march him across the tarmac in a walk of shame. Let's go. The show's over. It was at that precise moment that a new sound cut through the air. It wasn't the sound of a jet engine or the crackle of a radio. It was the piercing wail of sirens. And they were getting closer fast. But these weren't the familiar sounds of base security. This was the powerful sound of command escort vehicles. Heads turned. In the distance, a black staff car flanked by two imposing security trucks was racing toward them. Lights were flashing. They didn't slow as they approached. They sped on with alarming speed, scattering airmen who leaped out of the way. The convoy screeched to a halt in a perfect formation just yards from the grounded F-16. It created a barrier between the crowd and the scene. The passenger door of the staff car flew open before the vehicle had fully stopped. Colonel Matthews, a full colonel with a chest covered in ribbons, launched himself out. His face was a mask of controlled fury. He was followed by his command chief and the maintenance group commander. They moved with terrifying purpose. The entire flight line froze. The casual chatter, the nervous laughter, the hum of activity, it all stopped. The arrival of a wing commander on the flight line was rare and serious. The arrival of the commander, with his entire senior staff, moving like a strike team, was unheard of. Kyle stopped dead. His hand was still holding Arthur's arm. He stared. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. Why was the base's top officer here? For him? For this old man? Colonel Matthews didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the $1 million jet. His eyes were burning with an intensity that could melt steel. They were locked on one person and one person only, Arthur Vance. He strode forward. His polished boots ate up the distance on the concrete. He walked right up to Kyle. His gaze was so fierce that the young technician flinched as if he'd been physically struck. Matthews stopped 2 feet from them. He didn't yell. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Kyle's hand on Arthur's arm. The meaning was unmistakable. Kyle snatched his hand away. It was as if the old man's sleeve were on fire. Then Colonel Matthews turned his full attention to Arthur. In one crisp, powerful motion, he brought his hand up to his brow. He rendered the sharpest, most profound salute of his entire career. It was a gesture of such deep, unwavering respect that it seemed to vibrate in the silent air. "Mr. Vance," Colonel Matthews said. His voice rang with emotion for all to hear. "It is an honor, sir." A collective silent gasp rippled through the crowd of airmen. Jaws dropped, eyes widened. Kyle looked as though the ground had vanished beneath his feet. He swayed slightly. His face was completely drained of color. Matthews held the salute for a long moment. Then he slowly lowered his hand. He kept his back perfectly straight. He was addressing Arthur, but speaking loud enough for every person on the tarmac to hear his words. "For the benefit of those who are too young or too ignorant to know whose presence they are in," Matthews began. His voice boomed with authority. "This is Mr. Arthur Vance. In the early days of the Viper program, he was known as the Ghost of the Flight Line, because he would appear out of nowhere and solve problems that engineers swore were impossible." He paused. He let the weight of that title sink in. Mr. Vance was a lead design engineer for the original YF-16 prototype. He personally wrote 3 chapters of the maintenance manual that you technicians use every single day. The very fly-by-wire system that's giving you fits. He holds 2 of the core patents on it. Matthews took a step closer. His eyes scanned the faces of the stunned young airmen. During Operation Desert Storm, a software glitch grounded an entire squadron of Vipers. The Pentagon was scrambling. While they were still holding meetings, this man got on a transport plane, flew into a war zone with a small case of tools, and personally got all 24 Vipers back in the air in 36 hours. He didn't ask for a medal. He didn't ask for recognition. He just did the work and flew home. The silence on the tarmac was now pure awe. Master Sergeant Reyes, watching from the edge, simply nodded. A look of profound validation was on his face. He had recognized greatness, even when it was quiet. This man, Colonel Matthews concluded, his voice softening with reverence as he looked back at Arthur, is not just a veteran or a contractor. He is a living part of this aircraft's soul. He has forgotten more about the F-16 than any of us will ever know. Finally, the full terrifying weight of what he had done crashed down on Kyle. He had not just disrespected an old man. He had mocked a founding father. He had threatened a legend. Colonel Matthews then turned. The warmth in his expression vanished. It was replaced by a gaze as cold and hard as Arctic ice. He fixed it on Kyle. "Technician," he said. His voice was deceptively soft. "What is your name?" "Kyle, sir. Airman First Class Kyle Peterson, sir," he stammered. His own name sounded foreign in his mouth. "Airman Peterson," Matthews said. The name tasted like poison. "Your arrogance and your ignorance today have brought shame to this wing. You were faced with a problem you couldn't solve, a failure of your own technical skill. You chose to channel that failure into cruelty. You chose to humiliate a man whose boots you are not worthy of polishing." He stepped closer. His voice dropped even lower. "You looked at a living legend and saw nothing but a target for your own failure. You are a disgrace to that uniform." The public rebuke was devastating. It was a professional destruction performed in front of the entire flight line. Kyle stood paralyzed by shame. He couldn't look away from the colonel's anger. But then, a quiet voice cut through the tension. "Colonel, that's enough." It was Arthur. He had been silent throughout the entire ordeal. But now he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried an undeniable authority. Even the wing commander instantly obeyed. Matthews fell silent. Arthur Vance turned to the trembling young man. He looked at Kyle, not with anger or pity, but with the calm gaze of a teacher. "Son," he said gently, "the machine doesn't care about your rank. It doesn't care about your pride. It only cares about the truth of the problem." He raised a slightly shaky hand. He pointed not at the complex avionics bay where Kyle's team had been working. He pointed at a small, almost hidden panel near the portside landing gear strut. "You were all looking in the wrong place," Arthur explained. "You were looking at the brain. The problem isn't in the brain. It's in the nerves, right there." He pointed again. "That's the hydraulic bypass actuator for the emergency power unit. It's a known issue on the Block 30s, especially after a cold soak at altitude. The valve gets sticky." He looked down at the small leather pouch in his hand, which he had held onto the whole time. He unrolled it and picked out the strange custom-made spanner wrench. He held it out to Kyle. "You don't need a computer. You just need to give it a little tap. Just remind it what it's supposed to do." As Kyle hesitantly reached for the old dark steel of the wrench, the world flickered again for Arthur. The tool in his hand felt heavy with more than just its own weight. He saw himself, 30 years younger, standing in a pristine, clean room at the General Dynamics facility in Fort Worth. A man with brilliant eyes and a slide rule in his pocket was there. The chief designer of the entire F-16 program was handing him this very wrench, freshly made. "Sometimes, Art," the man had said, his voice was full of wisdom, "the most complex problems in the world don't need a more complex solution. They just need a steady hand and the courage to try the simple thing first. Never forget that." Kyle's fingers closed around the tool. It felt strangely balanced in his hand. Under the silent, watchful gaze of the wing commander, his own crew, and the man he had ridiculed, Kyle walked to the F-16. He knelt down. His movement was stiff with dread and embarrassment. He found the small actuator Arthur had indicated. It looked insignificant, just an afterthought in the jet's complex anatomy. He raised the wrench. For a moment, he hesitated. The entire flight line held its breath. Then, with a gentle, precise motion, he tapped the valve housing. Tap. The sound was tiny, almost lost on the vast tarmac, but it was followed by another sound. A more significant sound. A soft, satisfying hiss of released pressure, a click-clack of a relay seating itself. And then magic. The cockpit of the F-16 flickered to life. The dashboard screens glowed green. The voice of the onboard computer, a calm female voice known affectionately as Bitching Betty, announced, "Main power online." The auxiliary power unit began to whine, spooling up to speed. The dead predator was alive. A wave of astonished murmurs swept through the crowd. The problem that had stumped a team of trained technicians with thousands of dollars of diagnostic equipment for 3 hours had just been solved in 3 seconds. With a tap from a homemade tool in the hands of an old man, Colonel Matthews stared at the illuminated cockpit, then back at Arthur. He turned to the maintenance group commander. "I want Airman Peterson and his entire team off the line. They will report for a week-long training seminar starting at 0800 tomorrow. The topic," he said, looking at Arthur, "will be the history and legacy of the F-16 airframe. And the first lesson will be taught by Mr. Vance, if he would do us the honor." A formal base-wide letter of apology was drafted and delivered to Mr. Vance personally. The story of what happened on the tarmac would become mandatory reading at the maintenance training school. Weeks later, the heat of the incident had cooled. Kyle Peterson was a different man. The arrogance had been stripped away. It was replaced by a quiet humility. He was in the base library studying old technical orders. He was trying to learn what he had so clearly missed. He saw Arthur Vance sitting in a worn armchair in the history section. He was reading a book. Kyle's heart pounded. He bought 2 cups of coffee from the small kiosk and walked over. His steps were hesitant. "Mr. Vance," he said quietly. Arthur looked up from his book. His pale blue eyes held recognition, but no anger. I wanted to say thank you," Kyle stammered. He placed a coffee on the small table beside Arthur. "For the lesson. And I'm sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse." Arthur looked at the young man. He saw genuine remorse in his eyes. He gave a small, forgiving nod. He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Sit down, son." Kyle sat down. They didn't speak about the incident on the tarmac again. Instead, Arthur started talking. He talked about the feel of the wind over a new wing design, about the smell of a hot engine, about the challenges of making a machine that was smarter and faster than the pilot, but still obeyed him like a part of his own body. He spoke of the plane not as a weapon, but as a living creation. And Kyle listened. Finally, he understood. The soul of the machine was not in its wires or its software. It was in the spirit of the people who created it. The story of Arthur Vance is a powerful reminder. True legends often walk among us. Their greatness is hidden in plain sight. They wait not for recognition, but for a problem to solve. If you were moved by this story of quiet heroism, please like this video and share it with others. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that deserve to be told.